High above the Colorado Rockies, where the air grows thin and the sky stretches infinite, Zara Knight pressed her weathered hands against the steering wheel of her modified truck. The dashboard glowed with an array of meteorological instruments, their soft blue light casting shadows across her determined features. At 29, she had chased more storms than most people see raindrops. Her camera capturing nature's fury in ways that made gallery visitors hold their breath. But tonight, as thick snowflakes began their relentless dance across her windshield, Zara felt the familiar ache that no amount of adrenaline could silence. It settled deep in her chest, that hollow space where other people kept their sense of home. She'd built her life around movement, around the next storm system, the next breathtaking shot of lightning splitting the sky. Yet in the quiet moments between nature's tantrums, when the world grew still and expectant, loneliness crept in like morning fog. The radio crackled with weather updates, each bulletin more urgent than the last. A massive storm system was building, the kind that meteorologists would study for decades, the kind that made Zara's pulse quicken with anticipation. But even as she pressed harder on the accelerator, racing toward the brewing tempest, a treacherous thought whispered through her mind. What would it feel like to have someone waiting for her return? Someone who saw beauty not just in her photographs, but in the quiet moments when she let her guard down. She'd tried relationships before, of course. Brief encounters with people who were initially drawn to her adventurous spirit, but eventually grew tired of sleeping alone while she chased storms across 3 states. "You love danger more than you could ever love me," her last boyfriend had said, and though she'd argued deep down, she wondered if he was right. Not because she loved danger, but because danger was predictable. Storms had patterns, cycles, warning signs. Hearts, she'd learned, were far more unpredictable. The elevation gauge on her dashboard climbed steadily as she wound through mountain passes that grew increasingly treacherous. Snow began falling harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. But Zara had driven through worse. She'd photographed tornadoes from distances that made seasoned storm chasers shake their heads, captured lightning strikes from ridgelines where the margin between breathtaking and deadly measured in seconds. What she couldn't capture, couldn't frame in her viewfinder, was the feeling she craved most, being truly seen. Not admired for her fearlessness or envied for her adventurous life, but understood in those vulnerable moments when the storm passed and silence settled like snow. She yearned for someone who wouldn't ask her to choose between her passion and their love. Someone who might even find beauty in the wildness that called to her soul. The truck's radio suddenly erupted with emergency warnings. The storm system had intensified beyond all predictions, turning what should have been a manageable winter storm into something approaching a blizzard of historic proportions. Visibility was dropping rapidly, wind speeds climbing to dangerous levels. Even Zara, who measured risk like other people measured coffee, felt a flutter of genuine concern. But with that concern came something else, an electric thrill that made her hands tighten on the wheel. This was why she did what she did. This moment when nature showed its true power. When the ordinary world fell away and only the essential remained, the storm, her skill, and the desperate beauty of being fully alive. As her truck climbed higher into the mountains, toward coordinates she'd marked for the perfect vantage point. Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this storm would be different. Not just because of its unprecedented intensity, but because something in the air itself felt charged with possibility. The kind of energy that preceded not just lightning, but transformation. She thought of the countless storms she'd witnessed, each one teaching her something new about resilience, about the strange beauty that emerged from chaos. But none had ever taught her about love. None had ever shown her what it might feel like to find someone who saw the same wild beauty she did. Someone who understood that some things were worth braving any storm to protect. The snow fell heavier now. And through her windshield, the world began to disappear into swirling white. Somewhere ahead, through the gathering darkness and the mounting storm, lay coordinates that promised the perfect shot. But as Zara pressed forward into the beautiful, dangerous night, she carried with her a hope she barely dared acknowledge, that this storm might finally teach her something about the weather of the heart. One moment Zara could see the mountain road stretching ahead, her headlights cutting through the snowfall like twin beams of determination. The next, a wall of snow engulfed her truck with such sudden ferocity that it felt like driving into a cloud. The GPS screen flickered and died. Her radio dissolved into static. Even her compass began spinning wildly, as if the storm had disrupted the very magnetic field of the earth. "Come on," she whispered, fighting the wheel as wind gusts threatened to push her off the narrow mountain road. She'd driven through dozens of storms, but this felt different, primal, almost alive in its intensity. The kind of weather that made ancient peoples believe in gods of thunder and wind. Her headlights revealed only swirling white chaos. No road markers, no guardrails, no reference points to guide her way. She was driving blind, trusting instinct and 20 years of experience reading weather patterns. But even her considerable skills had limits, and she was rapidly approaching them. The truck lurched suddenly, tires losing their grip on ice she couldn't see. Zara felt the sickening sensation of sliding, the steering wheel becoming useless in her hands. Time stretched like taffy as she fought for control, snow and darkness spinning outside her windows. Then, with a grinding crunch of metal against stone, everything stopped. Silence fell like a curtain. The engine sputtered and died. In the sudden quiet, Zara could hear only the whisper of snow against glass and the wild hammering of her heart. She was alive, miraculously uninjured, but thoroughly stuck. And in weather like this, being stranded could quickly become deadly. She tried the engine. Nothing. Tried her phone. No signal. The storm had effectively cut her off from the world, leaving her alone on a mountain she couldn't see with weather that showed no signs of mercy. But wait, was that light ahead? Through the swirling snow, she caught glimpses of something warm and golden, too steady to be lightning. A building, shelter, hope. Grabbing her emergency pack and camera bag, Zara pushed open the truck door and immediately gasped as Arctic wind cut through her storm jacket like it was made of tissue paper. The cold was shocking, brutal, taking her breath away. Snow whipped around her with such violence that she could barely see her own feet. But that light ahead called to her, a beacon in the wilderness. Each step was a battle against wind that tried to knock her sideways and snow that stung her face like thrown sand. Her boots sank deep with every step, the drifts already knee-high and climbing. But Zara had spent years learning to read her own limits, and she knew she could make it. She had to make it. As she fought through the storm, the building ahead began to take shape. Not a cabin or ranger station as she'd hoped, but something far more intriguing, a modern structure of glass and steel that seemed to embrace the mountain rather than conquer it. Observatory domes crowned its roof, and through massive windows, she could see the warm glow of sophisticated equipment and blessed sight, the flicker of firelight, a weather station. Of course, only a meteorologist would build something this beautiful in such an isolated location. Close enough to the sky to touch the storms as they were born, she reached the front door just as her strength began to flag, legs trembling from cold and exertion. The door was heavy, built to withstand wind that could strip paint from metal, but it opened smoothly at her touch. Warm air rushed out to greet her, carrying scents of coffee, wood smoke, and something else, something that made her think of safety, of home. "Hello," she called, stomping snow from her boots in the entryway. "I'm sorry to intrude, but my truck slid off about a quarter-mile back," a voice said from deeper in the building. A man's voice, warm and unhurried, with a slight roughness that came from hours of speaking to weather stations across radio frequencies. "I've been tracking you on radar for the last 10 minutes, watching you fight your way through the drifts." Quite impressive, actually. He emerged from what looked like a control room, and Zara felt her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold she'd just escaped. Tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, while studying weather data, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in his environment. His eyes were the color of storm clouds just before they broke open, and when they met hers, she felt a little jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "Dr. Kai Nakamura," he said, extending a hand that was warm and steady. "Welcome to Station Echo, though I have to say you picked quite a night for a visit." "Zara Knight," she replied, surprised by how her voice wanted to waver. His hand engulfed hers, and she was acutely aware of the contrast, her fingers still numb from cold, his radiating the kind of warmth that came from being exactly where you belonged. "I'm a storm photographer. Was trying to get to Ridge Point to shoot this system when it decided to show me who's boss." Something shifted in his expression: surprise, recognition, maybe even admiration. "Zara Knight, I know your work. Your lightning series from last summer's Supercell season was extraordinary. Those shots from inside the storm's mesocyclone, how did you even get that close without getting killed?" Heat rose in her cheeks, though she told herself it was just her body's response to coming in from the cold. "Carefully," she said. "And with a lot of luck." "Luck," he repeated, but his tone suggested he knew it was much more than that. "Would you like some coffee?" "You look like you could use something warm," she nodded, following him deeper into the station. The interior was even more impressive than the glimpse from outside had suggested. Banks of weather monitoring equipment hummed quietly along one wall, their screens displaying real-time data from sensors scattered across the mountain range. But what caught her attention was how seamlessly the technology blended with comfort soft drugs on the floor. Bookshelves filled with everything from meteorological textbooks to poetry collections, and a massive stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled invitingly. "This place is incredible," she said, accepting a mug of coffee that warmed her hands and sent steam rising toward her face. "How long have you been up here?" 3 years, Kai said, settling into a chair across from her near the fireplace. "It's perfect for my research, isolated enough to get clean data, high enough to monitor storm systems as they develop. Most people think I'm crazy for living so far from civilization. Most people don't understand the appeal of watching weather happen," Zara said, surprised by how naturally the conversation flowed. "They see storms as something to hide from, not something beautiful." His eyes lit up, and she realized she'd said exactly the right thing. "You get it. You actually get it." He leaned forward slightly, animated now. "Most people see a storm like the one outside and think destruction, chaos, something to be feared. But look," he gestured toward the massive windows, where lightning was beginning to flicker in the distance like a cosmic light show. Each flash illuminated the swirling snow, turning the world into something magical and otherworldly. "It's not chaos at all," he continued. It's incredibly organized, beautiful in its complexity. Every lightning strike follows precise electrical laws. Every snowflake forms according to specific atmospheric conditions. There's a poetry to it that most people never see. Zara found herself studying his face as he spoke, noting the passion that transformed his features. The way his hands moved expressively as he described pressure systems and electrical charges. She'd met plenty of weather enthusiasts in her line of work, but something about Kai was different. He didn't just study storms, he seemed to understand them on an almost mystical level. You talk about weather like it's alive, she observed, isn't it? He met her gaze directly, and she felt that little electric shock again. Energy constantly moving, transforming, responding to conditions around it, growing stronger or weaker based on what it encounters. Storms have personalities, Zara. They have moods and patterns and ways of surprising you just when you think you understand them. The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. She was used to people being impressed by her work, fascinated by her lifestyle, but Kai seemed to see something deeper. He looked at her like she was part of the same beautiful mystery he spent his life studying. This system outside, she said, nodding toward the windows where the storm continued its relentless assault. What makes it so different? I've never seen anything build this fast or this intensely. Temperature differentials, he said, but his clinical explanation was warmed by obvious excitement. Arctic air colliding with an unusually warm moisture stream from the Gulf. The shear forces are creating rotation patterns I've only seen in theoretical models. It's like watching the birth of something completely new. Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating his face in stark relief. For a moment, Zara forgot about her truck, her equipment, her carefully planned shot location. All she could see was this man who spoke about storms like love songs, who'd built himself a sanctuary where he could be close to the wild beauty most people feared. How long will it last? She asked. Hours, he said. Maybe through tomorrow. You're not going anywhere tonight, I'm afraid. That road won't be passable until the plows can get through. And in conditions like this, he gestured helplessly at the windows where the world had disappeared entirely behind walls of wind and snow. The practical part of Zara's mind noted that she was stranded, potentially for days, with a complete stranger in one of the most isolated locations she'd ever encountered. But another part apart she usually kept carefully locked away whispered that maybe, just maybe, being stranded had never felt quite this much like being Foth's storm outside had settled into a steady, hypnotic rhythm, wind and snow creating a white cocoon around the weather station. Inside, warmth radiated from the fireplace while sophisticated equipment continued its quiet monitoring of nature's tantrum. Zara found herself curled in a leather chair that seemed designed for long nights of storm watching. Her coffee mug warming her palms as she studied the man across from her. Tell me something, Kai said. His voice soft enough that she had to lean forward slightly to hear him over the wind. What is it you're really chasing out there? Because I've seen your photographs, and they're not just documentation. They're intimate, like you're trying to capture something most people can't even see. The question caught her off guard. She was used to interviews, to people asking about her equipment or her most dangerous encounter. But no one had ever asked her about the why beneath the how. She started, then stopped, surprised by the vulnerability his simple question had opened. I suppose I'm trying to capture the moment when everything becomes clear. You know how before a storm breaks, there's this moment of perfect stillness? Like the world is holding its breath, waiting. And then lightning strikes, and for just an instant, everything is illuminated. Every raindrop, every blade of grass, every secret the darkness was hiding. That's what I'm chasing, that moment of absolute clarity. Kai's eyes never left her face as she spoke. And after the lightning, after that moment of clarity, darkness again, she said quietly. But you carry the memory of what you saw. You know what's out there, even when you can't see it. Something shifted in the air between them, a subtle change in pressure like the moment before thunder rolls. Kai set down his coffee mug and leaned back, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I do the same thing, he said finally, but from the other side. I watch storms form, track their development, predict their paths. I try to understand the patterns that create those moments of clarity you photograph. We're both storm chasers, Zara. We just chase different aspects of the same beautiful chaos. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I never thought of it that way. What got you started? The photography, I mean. Zara wrapped her fingers more tightly around her mug, using its warmth to anchor her as memories she rarely shared with anyone began to surface. My father was a pilot. Commercial aviation, nothing glamorous, but he loved flying through weather. Said it was like dancing with dragons. He used to take me up in small planes when I was young, show me storm systems from above. I was maybe 12 when we flew through the edge of a hurricane. Kai made a small sound of surprise, but didn't interrupt. It was terrifying and beautiful and completely transformative. All that power, all that energy, and we were this tiny speck moving through it. But we weren't victims, we were participants. Dad knew exactly how to read the wind patterns, how to find the safe paths through the chaos. He showed me that storms weren't something to fear if you understood them. They were something to respect, to learn from. He sounds like an extraordinary man. He was, the words came out rougher than she'd intended. Lost him in a crash when I was 17. Clear skies, perfect conditions. Mechanical failure that had nothing to do with weather at all. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm's continuous whisper against the windows. When Kai spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness that made her chest tighten. Is that why you photograph storms? To stay close to him? Maybe, she admitted. Or maybe to prove that the dangerous moments can also be beautiful. That something good can come from chaos. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. What about you? What made you want to spend your life studying weather patterns? Kai stood, moving to one of the instrument panels where screens displayed real-time atmospheric data. His fingers traced patterns in the air above the displays, and Zara could see him organizing his thoughts. My grandmother, he said finally. She lived in a small fishing village in Japan, and she could predict storms 3 days out just by watching the way clouds moved across the water. No instruments, no satellite data, just decades of observation and an intuitive understanding of patterns that science was only beginning to acknowledge. He turned back to her, leaning against the console. I was maybe 8 when a typhoon was bearing down on the coast. All the official forecasts said it would make landfall 40 kilometers south of the village, but my grandmother insisted it would turn. She made my grandfather take their boat out early, warned all the other fishermen. Most of them listened. She'd been right too many times to ignore, and she was right again. The typhoon turned exactly as she predicted, made landfall right where the boats would have been. Her knowledge passed down through generations of women who'd watched the sky like their lives depended on it because they did saved dozens of lives that night. His expression grew thoughtful. I wanted to understand how she knew things that our instruments couldn't detect. How intuition could be more accurate than technology. Did you ever figure it out? Some of it, he said, returning to his chair by the fire. She was reading micro patterns that our instruments were too crude to detect. Changes in cloud density, shifts in wind direction so subtle they barely registered. But there was something else too. Something that can't be quantified or programmed into a computer. Love, Zara said softly, understanding flooding through her. She loved those fishermen enough to pay attention to details that could save their lives. Kai's smile was radiant. Exactly. She didn't just study the weather, she communed with it, made it personal, relational. That's what I'm trying to do here. Not just collect data, but understand the personality of each system that passes through. Lightning flashed outside, closer now, illuminating both their faces in brief, brilliant relief. In that instant of clarity, Zara saw something in Kai's expression that made her pulse quicken. He was looking at her the way she looked at storms, with fascination, respect, and a kind of careful wonder. "Can I show you something?" he asked, standing and extending his hand. She nodded, accepting his help up from the chair. His fingers were warm and steady, and he didn't release her hand immediately when she stood. Instead, he led her toward the bank of windows that faced north, where the storm was putting on its most spectacular display. "Watch," he said, his voice dropping too barely above a whisper. Lightning flickered in the distance. Multiple strikes creating a stroboscopic dance across the sky. But Kai's free hand pointed to something else, the way the snow swirled in patterns that seemed almost choreographed, spiraling and flowing with mathematical precision. "Every flake is following the same pressure gradients," he explained, his voice soft near her ear. "But look at the overall pattern. It's beautiful, isn't it? Like a dance where everyone knows the steps." Zara was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his breath stirred the hair near her temple. She'd stood in the path of tornadoes, photographed lightning from exposed ridgelines. But this quiet moment watching snow fall felt more dangerous than any storm she'd ever encountered. "It is beautiful," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was talking about the snow anymore. "I've been up here alone for 3 years," Kai said quietly, "watching storms pass through, documenting their patterns, learning their secrets. But I've never had anyone to share it with. Someone who might understand why this is so much more than just weather data." He turned toward her, and she found herself caught in the gravity of his gaze. The hand that wasn't holding hers rose slowly, fingertips barely grazing her cheek in a touch so gentle it might have been snowflakes. "Zara," he said, her name carrying a weight that made her heart stutter. "I know we just met. And I know this situation is strange, you being stranded here. Me being isolated for so long that I might be reading signals that aren't there. But what signals?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The way you look at storms like they're living things. The way you understand that beauty and danger aren't opposites, they're dance partners. The way you make me feel less alone than I've felt in years, even though we've only been talking for a few hours." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. She was standing so close to him now that she could see flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes, could feel the careful restraint in the hand that touched her face like she was something precious and fragile. "And you're not reading signals that aren't there," she said softly. Something loosened in his expression, relief, hope, maybe both. The hand on her cheek became more certain, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent attention. "I've spent my whole adult life running toward storms," she continued. "But I've never been very good at staying in one place long enough to see what grows in the calm that comes after. Maybe, he said. Stepping impossibly closer, this storm will last long enough for you to find out. The space between them seemed to vibrate with possibility, charged like the air before lightning strikes. Zara felt herself leaning into that electric potential, drawn by a force that felt as natural and inevitable as weather itself. But then a proximity alarm chimed from one of his instruments, breaking the spell. Kai stepped back, professional instinct overriding the personal moment, and moved to check the readings. The system's intensifying, he said, though his voice carried a hint of regret. Wind speeds are approaching historic levels. This is this is extraordinary, Zara. I've never seen atmospheric conditions like this. She followed him to the monitors, acutely aware of the space between them now, of the moment that had been interrupted but not forgotten. As she watched him work, noting the competent way he interpreted the scrolling data, she realized something that both thrilled and terrified her for the first time in years. She didn't want to run toward the storm outside. She wanted to stay exactly where she was, in this warm sanctuary with this man who saw beauty in the same chaos that called to her soul. The storm outside might be reaching historic proportions, but the one building between them felt even more powerful and far more dangerous to the carefully constructed walls around her heart. The storm had transformed from mere weather into something mythical. Wind speeds registered at levels that made Kai's instruments flash warning colors, while snow fell so heavily it seemed like the sky was emptying itself of every flake it had ever held. But inside the station, a different kind of intensity was building. One measured in glances held a heartbeat too long and words that carried layers of meaning neither of them dared speak aloud. "Show me how you track it," Zara said, moving closer to where Kai stood monitoring the radar displays. "I want to understand what you see that I can't capture in photographs." He glanced at her, and she caught the brief flutter of uncertainty in his expression, as if he was calculating risks that had nothing to do with barometric pressure. "It's technical, probably not as interesting as you think. Try me," she said, settling onto the stool beside his workstation, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Close enough to catch the scent that was uniquely him, something clean and masculine that reminded her of mountain air and possibilities. Kai's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up different data streams and overlaying them on the main display. "This is the storm structure," he explained, his voice taking on the focused intensity she'd heard when he talked about his grandmother's weather wisdom. "See these spiral patterns? That's rotation." And here his finger traced lines across the screen. "These are wind vectors showing how the system is pulling energy from the temperature differential." Zara found herself watching his hands as much as the screen. Long fingers, capable and gentle, moving with the same careful precision she used when adjusting camera settings. She wondered what those hands would feel like tracing patterns across her skin instead of weather maps. "It's like watching a living thing grow," she said softly. "Exactly." He turned to face her, and suddenly they were closer than either had intended. His knee brushed against hers, and she felt that contact like an electric current running up her leg. "Most people see destruction, but look at this." He pulled up another display, leaning closer to point out details. "The storm is creating its own ecosystem. Ice crystals forming in perfect geometric patterns, electrical charges building and releasing in precise intervals. It's not chaos at all, it's the most complex dance in nature." His shoulder touched hers as he reached across to adjust a control, and Zara felt her breath catch. The professional distance he'd maintained was dissolving, replaced by something far more dangerous. She could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat. could feel the careful control he was exercising not to turn his head and meet her gaze. Kai, she said softly. His name little more than a whisper. He went very still, then slowly turned to face her. They were so close now that she could see herself reflected in his eyes. Could count the individual lashes that framed his storm-colored irises. This is probably not wise, he said, his voice rough with restraint. Probably not, she agreed, but made no move to pull away. You're stranded here because of the weather. Vulnerable situation, isolated location. I don't want you to feel pressured. She silenced him by placing one finger against his lips, the contact sending shockwaves through her entire system. I'm probably the least vulnerable person you've ever met, she said. I chase tornadoes for a living, remember? If I didn't want to be this close to you, I'd be on the other side of the room. His lips curved in a slow smile beneath her finger, and she felt the warmth of his breath against her skin. Point taken, he murmured, but instead of closing the distance between them, he surprised her by standing up and extending his hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. Intrigued, she let him lead her toward a spiral staircase she hadn't noticed before. They climbed to what appeared to be an observation deck, a glass-enclosed space that jutted out from the main structure, offering 360-degree views of the storm. The sound of wind was louder here, and lightning flashed close enough to make the hair on her arms stand up. This is where I come to really watch, Kai said, settling onto a bench that faced the most spectacular view. No instruments, no data feeds. Just me and whatever the sky wants to show me. Zara sat beside him, acutely aware of the way the bench forced them to sit closer together. Through the glass ceiling, she could see snow swirling in patterns that looked almost hypnotic, while lightning created brief moments of crystal clarity that revealed the storm's true scope. It's incredible, she breathed. Like being inside a snow globe made by gods. Watch this, Kai said, checking his phone for the time. In about 30 seconds, we should see something special. She waited, intensely curious, until suddenly the entire sky lit up with a display that made her gasp. Lightning flickered in rapid sequence across multiple cloud formations, creating a stroboscopic light show that illuminated the swirling snow like a cosmic disco ball. Aurora, Kai explained softly. The storm's electrical activity is interacting with the magnetosphere. It only happens under very specific conditions, the kind of conditions we're seeing tonight. The lights danced across the sky in curtains of green and gold, and Zara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd seen the northern lights before, but never like this, never through snow that caught and scattered the colored light into millions of tiny prisms. I've never, she started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the beauty above them and the warmth of the man beside her. Neither have I, Kai said quietly. I've read about this phenomenon, seen photographs, but never witnessed it myself. I'm glad I'm not seeing it alone. She turned to look at him, struck by the vulnerability in his voice. The aurora painted his features in shifting colors, and she realized that somewhere between climbing into his sanctuary and watching nature's most spectacular light show, everything had changed. The careful distance she maintained, the walls she'd built around her heart. The conviction that she was better off moving than staying, all of it was crumbling like barriers made of snow. Zara, he said, her name carrying a weight that made her pulse skip. Yes. I need to tell you something, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve. He shifted to face her more fully, and she could see the courage it was taking for him to be this honest. I know we just met. I know this situation is surreal and you'll probably leave as soon as the road's clear and I'll go back to my solitary life studying weather patterns. But sitting here with you, Watching this storm, sharing something I've never shared with another person, it's made me realize how lonely I've been. Not just for company, but for connection. For someone who sees what I see when I look at the sky, her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Kai, I'm falling for you, he continued, the words coming out in a rush as if he needed to say them before he could second guess himself. Falling hard and fast, like snow in a blizzard. And I know it's crazy, and I know you have a life out there chasing storms across 3 continents, but I had to tell you. Because in 37 years, I've never met anyone who made me want to share my world this badly. The Aurora continued its dance above them, painting the moment in otherworldly light. Zara felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening. Like a flower that had been waiting for exactly the right conditions to bloom. I've spent my entire adult life running, she said softly, reaching for his hand. Running towards storms, running away from anything that felt like it might tie me down. But sitting here with you, watching this impossible, beautiful night, I don't want to run anymore. For the first time in my life, I want to stay still long enough to see what happens next. His fingers tightened around hers, and she could feel the tremor in his hands' excitement. Nervousness, hope. What happens next? He asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. She leaned closer, drawn by the magnetic pull that had been building between them all evening. I think, she whispered, we find out what kind of lightning strikes when two storm chasers stop running. The space between them disappeared like morning mist. When their lips met, it was soft at first, tentative, questioning, like the first raindrops before a downpour. But then something ignited, and the kiss deepened with all the intensity of the storm raging around their glass sanctuary. Kai's hand rose to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverent care. She could taste coffee on his lips, could feel the way his breath stuttered when she tangled her fingers in his hair. This was what she'd been chasing without knowing it, not the moment of clarity that came with lightning, but the sustained warmth that came with finding someone who understood the weather in your soul when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, the aurora above them seemed to pulse in approval. Zara rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the space between them. That was, she started, worth waiting 37 years for, he finished. His voice rough with emotion. She laughed, the sound bright and surprised. I was going to say better than photographing lightning. But yours works too. Thunder rolled across the mountains, closer now. And through the glass they could see the storm reaching its peak intensity. But inside their cocoon of warmth and possibility, Zara felt safer than she had anywhere else in the world. The storm's not going anywhere tonight, Kai said, his thumb still tracing gentle patterns on her cheek. Good, she whispered against his lips. Neither am I. Dawn was still hours away, but the storm had reached that mystical peak where chaos becomes poetry. Snow fell in sheets so thick they created their own weather system, while lightning flickered through the clouds in patterns that seemed almost musical. Inside the observation deck, Zara and Kai had moved closer together on the bench, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched nature's grandest performance. Tell me about your favorite storm, Zara said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind that sang around their glass sanctuary. Kai's arm tightened around her, and she felt him smile against her hair. This one, he said without hesitation. This one. She lifted her head to look at him, eyebrows raised in surprise. It's not even over yet, exactly. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Every storm I've ever studied, I've watched alone. Documented the data, analyzed the patterns, written reports that maybe 3 other meteorologists will read. But this storm, he gestured toward the spectacular light show surrounding them, this storm brought you to me. How could any other storm compare? Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward until she felt warm despite the Arctic temperatures beyond the glass. You can't possibly know that yet. We've known each other for less than 12 hours, can't I? He shifted to face her more fully, and she could see her own reflection in his eyes, wine-tousled and glowing with something she'd never seen in her own face before. Zara, I've spent years studying the science of how storms develop. First, there's instability to air masses that shouldn't coexist in the same space. Then there's a trigger, something that causes them to interact instead of simply passing by each other. The moment they touch, everything changes. Energy builds, patterns form, and what started as separate systems becomes something entirely new. She felt her pulse skip as understanding dawned. And you think that's what happened to us? I know it is. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining like they'd been designed to fit together. 2 people who built their lives around solitude, around chasing something just beyond reach. We shouldn't have worked your need for movement, my need for stillness. But the moment we met, the moment those 2 incompatible systems collided, lightning flashed above them, and in that brief illumination, Zara saw herself as Kai saw her. Not the fearless storm chaser who never stayed in one place long enough to get attached. Not the woman who'd convinced herself that love was just another kind of dangerous weather to be avoided. She saw someone worthy of being cherished. Someone whose restless spirit might finally have found a place to call home. I'm scared, she whispered. The admission torn from somewhere deep inside her of the storm. Of this, she gestured between them, encompassing the growing certainty she felt, the way her heart seemed to recognize him despite logic insisting they were still strangers. Of wanting something I've never let myself want before. Kai's free hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. What do you want, Zara? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Outside, the storm continued its relentless dance, but inside their glass cocoon, time seemed suspended. She could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the warmth of his body beside her, could see the patient hope in his expression as he waited for her answer. You, she said finally. The word carrying the weight of every wall she was choosing to tear down. I want you. Not just tonight, not just until the storm passes. I want to learn what it means to stay somewhere long enough to plant roots. I want to share sunrises and argue about weather patterns and fall asleep knowing someone will be there when I wake up. His smile was radiant, transforming his face with pure joy. Even if staying means less traveling. Fewer storms to chase? There will always be storms, she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. But there might never be another you. The kiss that followed was different from their first, less desperate, more reverent. A sealing of promises neither had expected to make. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, the aurora above them had intensified, as if nature itself was celebrating their decision to stop running from love. I have something to confess, Kai said, his voice rough with emotion. When I first saw your truck on the radar, fighting through the drifts to get here, I hoped. Before I knew who you were, before I'd even seen your face, I hoped that maybe the storm had brought me exactly what I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. What were you waiting for? Someone brave enough to weather any storm with me. Someone who wouldn't ask me to choose between love and the work that feeds my soul. Someone who might love this place, this life, enough to want to share it. Tears spilled over then, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen. "I've never had a home," she said shakily. "Never even wanted one. But being here with you, watching you love this mountain and your work and the sky itself, I think I finally understand what home actually means. What does it mean?" "It's not a place," she said, leaning into his warmth. "It's a person. It's finding someone whose soul matches yours, whose dreams complement your own instead of competing with them. Home is what happens when you stop running long enough to realize you've already found everything you were searching for." Thunder crashed overhead, so close that the glass around them vibrated, but neither of them flinched. They'd found their shelter in each other, a sanctuary that could weather any storm. "Marry me," Kai said suddenly, the words escaping before he could second guess them. Zara's breath caught. "What?" "I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "I know we've known each other for less than a day, but Zara, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The way you laugh, the way you see beauty in chaos, the way you make me feel like I've been half asleep for 37 years and just woke up. I don't want to spend another day without you. I don't want to risk letting you leave and losing the best thing that's ever happened to me." She stared at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his impulsive proposal, the fear that she might think he was moving too fast or asking too much. But looking into his eyes, feeling the absolute rightness of being exactly where she was, she realized that timing was just another kind of weather, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and sometimes perfect in its unexpectedness. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, to whatever crazy, beautiful life we're going to build together in this sanctuary you've created." She laughed, the sound bright with joy and disbelief. "I must be losing my mind. I don't even know your middle name, Hiroshi," he said, grinning. "After my grandfather, the fisherman who taught my grandmother to read the sky. What's yours?" "Rain," she said, and watched his eyes widen with delight. "My parents had a sense of humor about their weather-obsessed daughter." "Zara Rain Knight," he said, testing the sound of it. "Soon to be Zara Rain Nakamura." "I like the sound of that," she said, then kissed him again, sealing a promise made under Aurora light and surrounded by the most beautiful storm either of them had ever witnessed outside. The wind began to shift, and Kai's trained ear caught the subtle change in pitch that meant the storm was moving into its final phase. But inside their glass sanctuary, surrounded by the glow of equipment that monitored the pulse of the sky, two souls who had spent their lives chasing weather had finally learned that some storms were worth riding out together, that some lightning strikes were meant to illuminate the path toward home. "When this storm passes," Zara said, settling back against his shoulder, "I want to photograph the aftermath. Not the destruction, the transformation. The way snow reshapes the landscape, creates new patterns, new possibilities, and I'll study the atmospheric conditions that made tonight possible," Kai said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We'll document this storm from every angle, the science and the art. The data and the beauty, our first collaboration," she murmured, already imagining the ways their different perspectives might create something neither could achieve alone. "The first of many," he agreed. And in his voice she heard the promise of countless storms yet to come. Countless dawns they would watch break together over mountains that would become as familiar as the sound of his breathing beside her. The aurora began to fade as true dawn approached, but the warmth between them only grew stronger. A shelter they would carry with them no matter what weather the future might bring. The storm was dying, not with violence or sudden cessation, but with the gentle exhaustion that comes after nature has spent all its fury and found peace on the other side. Snow still fell, but softly now, like a lullaby made visible. The wind had dropped from its howling crescendo to a whisper that seemed to carry promises of clear skies to come. Zara and Kai had moved from the observation deck back to the main living area, where the fireplace cast dancing shadows on walls lined with weather instruments that hummed with quiet satisfaction. They sat curled together on the leather sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them drowsy with contentment and the emotional intensity of the night they'd shared. "Look," Kai said softly, nodding toward the eastern windows where the faintest suggestion of light was beginning to brighten the horizon. "Dawn's coming," Zara murmured against his chest, where his heartbeat had become as familiar as her own. "First sunrise of our engagement. Should we make a wish?" "I already got mine," he said, his voice rough with sleepiness and something deeper. "Everything I could have wished for is right here in my arms." She smiled, pressing a kiss to the hollow of his throat where his pulse fluttered against her lips. "Flatterer. Though I have to admit, if someone had told me yesterday that I'd spend the night stranded on a mountain with a meteorologist and end up engaged, I'd have suggested they check the barometric pressure for signs of delusional weather." His chest trembled with quiet laughter. "Delusional weather? You know, the kind that makes people do crazy, impulsive, completely irrational things like fall in love at first sight and propose marriage after 12 hours. "Ah," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "That kind of weather. Very dangerous meteorological phenomenon. Should definitely be studied extensively." "Extensively," she agreed, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "Might take years of careful observation to understand fully. Decades, probably. Good thing I have a research partner now." The easy banter felt as natural as breathing, and Zara marveled at how quickly they'd found their rhythm together. She'd had relationships before, brief, intense connections that burned bright and faded fast, but nothing had ever felt like this. Nothing had ever felt like coming home to herself. "Can I ask you something?" she said, tracing lazy patterns on his chest with one finger. "Anything. Are you sure about this? About me staying, about us building a life together? Because I need you to know I'm not going to be a traditional partner. I'll still need to travel sometimes, still need to chase storms. I can't promise to be content with just watching weather happen from behind glass windows." Kai was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him choosing his words carefully. "Zara," he said finally, "I fell in love with a storm chaser. Not despite what you do, but because of it. Because you see beauty in chaos and aren't afraid to get close enough to capture it. Why would I want to change that?" Relief flooded through her, warm and sweet. Some people think love means trying to tame the wildness in each other. Some people don't understand that wildness and devotion aren't opposites, he said, his hands stroking through her hair with gentle reverence. "I don't want to tame your storms, Zara. I want to help you predict them better, understand them more deeply. I want to be your base camp, your safe harbor, the place you come back to between adventures. And I want to show you the world beyond this mountain," she said, excitement already building as she imagined the possibilities. Storm systems in the Amazon, lightning over the Sahara, Aurora displays in Iceland. "There's so much beauty out there, Kai. So much weather to witness together. Mobile research station," he mused, and she could hear the scientist in him engaging with the possibilities. "Portable instruments, satellite uplinks. We could document storms from angles no one's ever captured before. Your artistic eye combined with my technical analysis. A husband and wife storm chasing team," she said, testing the words and finding they fit perfectly. Though we'll need a bigger truck, better equipment. Maybe a home base for the winter months when the storms are quiet. He paused, then added with characteristic thoughtfulness, children, eventually. Little weather geeks who think tornadoes are bedtime stories and lightning is night lights. The image he painted made her chest tight with longing. She'd never let herself imagine a future like that, rooted enough to raise children, wild enough to show them the wonders of the world, stable enough to give them the security she'd craved after losing her father. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Though they'll probably be the only kids in kindergarten who can explain pressure gradients, best educated children in their class," he agreed solemnly, then spoiled the effect by pressing a tickling kiss to her neck that made her giggle and squirm in his arms outside the windows. Dawn was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the storm's last gift before surrendering to clear weather. The snow had stopped falling entirely now, leaving the world transformed, sculpted into new shapes, covered in pristine white that would soon reveal the patterns of wind and weather in its drifts and curves. "I should check on my truck," Zara said reluctantly, though she made no move to extract herself from Kai's embrace. "Road won't be passable for hours yet," he said, tightening his arms around her. "Plenty of time to figure out the logistics later. Right now, I just want to hold my and watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Your," she repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that better than storm chaser." She considered this seriously. "Different kind of beautiful. Storm chaser is who I am, wild, independent, always moving. But that's who I'm choosing to become. Someone who belongs somewhere, who has promises to keep and dreams to share." "You can be both," Kai said with quiet certainty. "Wild and committed, independent and devoted. Love doesn't require you to choose sides in the war between freedom and belonging. It just asks you to find someone worth sharing both with." Tears pricked her eyes again, happy tears, overwhelmed tears. Grateful tears for this man who understood that love wasn't about cage building but about flying in formation. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both monumental and completely natural. "I love your mind, your passion, your gentleness, the way you see poetry in pressure systems. I love that you built a sanctuary in the clouds and then opened the door to let me in." "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I love your courage, your artistry, the way you chase beauty into the heart of chaos. I love that you taught me the difference between solitude and loneliness, between watching life and living it." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promises, as dawn broke fully over the mountains and painted their world in light. When they parted, both of them drowsy with contentment and the approaching need for sleep, Zara settled more deeply into Kai's embrace. "When we wake up," she murmured against his chest, "we'll start planning our future. Figure out the practical details, call our families. Probably get teased mercilessly for falling in love during a blizzard." "When we wake up," he agreed, his voice growing soft with approaching sleep, "we'll start our life together. But right now, I just want to hold you while you dream." "What should I dream about?" "Storms and sunshine," he whispered, his breathing already evening out into the rhythm of sleep. "Mountains and movement. All the weather we'll chase together, all the sunrises we'll share. All the love we'll build between the lightning and the calm." Zara closed her eyes, feeling safer and more at peace than she had in years. Outside, the world lay transformed by the storm's passage, sculpted into new possibilities. Inside, Two hearts beat in perfect synchronization, creating their own weather system of warmth and wonder. As sleep claimed them both. Wrapped in each other's arms beside a fire that would burn through till morning, the last wisps of snow began to fall. Not with the fury of the storm that had brought them together, but with the gentle benediction of weather that had done its work well, reshaping not just the landscape, but two lives that would never be the same. In her dreams, Zara chased storms across painted skies, but always with the knowledge that somewhere behind her, a light burned in a window high on a mountain, calling her home. And in his dreams, Kai watched weather patterns dance across his instruments while gentle hands showed him how to capture their beauty in ways that data could never express. They slept the sleep of souls who had found their perfect storm, and when they woke, it would be to a world made new by weather, by love, and by the radical decision to stop running long enough to build something beautiful together. The storm had passed, but the lightning it sparked between two hearts would burn bright for all the seasons yet to come. The end. Thank you for joining Zara and Kai in their storm-swept love story. May your dreams be filled with gentle weather and hearts that recognize home when they find it. Sleep well, dear listener, and may tomorrow bring you love as unexpected and beautiful as lightning dancing across mountain skies. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never planned to visit.